I thought I had left Jake in the past. 3 years of silence, and then, out of nowhere, he begged me to take in his family under the guise of a fake emergency. He lied, manipulated, and tried to take advantage of me while sitting on a pile of cash from selling his house. Now, everyone knows the truth. His greed and audacity have been exposed. And me? I dodged a disaster. But what hurts the most is knowing that he truly believed he could use me and get away with it. First of all, this isn't a post where I'm asking whether I did the right thing or not. I know I did the right thing. This is just an emotional outpouring about a really shitty day. So my ex-friend, let's call him Jake, whom I hadn't spoken to in almost 3 years, suddenly reached out. He claimed there was an emergency at his house, and he needed a place for himself, his wife, and their 3 kids to stay until they could figure things out. This is the same guy who, when I was going through some serious trauma, told me he couldn't be my friend anymore because, as a childless woman, I was a bad influence on his kids. A little backstory. Our friendship ended because I was in a horrible place mentally. My dad had died, and that was just one of the terrible things that had happened to me over the course of 3 months. I was looking for comfort, but instead, Jake decided that I was dragging their family down. Back then, he and his wife had 2 kids. Long story short, I wasn't worth their time because they had more valuable friends. This wasn't just some random acquaintance. We'd known each other since grad school. We spent years doing fun stuff together. Rock climbing, renting cabins by the lake with mutual friends, taking ski trips. A decade of friendship. And just like that, I was disposable. That hurt. A lot. Especially because I was at my lowest point. What stung even more? I was there for him when he found out his mother had cancer. I even attended her funeral. And then, 3 years of silence. No calls, no messages. I figured he'd gone full family man mode, like so many people do, where anyone who doesn't fit into their perfect suburban narrative is viewed with suspicion. Then, today, I see a message pop up on my phone. I never blocked him or deleted his number, so his name was still there. He was asking if he, his wife, and 3 kids could crash at my place because their water heater had broken. Apparently, this was an emergency, and letting them stay would be a huge favor that he'd owe me for. I had a lot of emotions. Apparently, since he decided I was a bad influence, he and his wife had another baby, and now he was asking me for help. So I asked, why me? Out of all the people he could have gone to, why was I the one getting this message? His response? He was out of options. No one else had space for him, especially with his 5-month-old baby. I asked why he couldn't just get a hotel room. He said it was too expensive, and they were already drowning in medical debt because their newborn had been in the NICU. I told him that was really unfortunate, but still, why me? He said he knew I had helped someone with emergency housing last year, and that I had enough space. Since I had been so generous back then, I could surely be generous now. At this point, I knew exactly what he was talking about, but I still wanted to know how he found out. That situation had been private. Turns out the couple I helped had posted about it on Facebook. Quick side story. Last year, one of my closest college friends, Anna, who has lupus, caught COVID. She was incredibly careful, but this happened before high-risk groups had access to vaccines. She's in her mid-30s and, aside from the lupus, was in great health. She even ran marathons. But lupus made COVID much worse. She ended up in the ICU. On top of that, she was pregnant, and her husband had to make an impossible decision: save Anna or try to keep the pregnancy. Essentially, it was her life or both of them dying. Thankfully, her husband is a good man, and he let the doctors save her. But Anna's mother lost her damn mind over it. She straight up said that Anna should have died with the baby. She told her daughter her life wasn't worth anything anymore, and even tried to bring in a priest to perform last rites while Anna was still in a coma. You can imagine the absolute nightmare this created. Anna's brother and his wife needed to get out of that house immediately. I had a spare room and lived close to the hospital, so they stayed with me for a couple of days until they found a long-term hotel. No one knew if Anna was going to survive, so obviously, they wanted to be near her. They had originally been staying with Anna's mom, but after that mess, no way. Luckily, Anna survived. She completely cut ties with her mother, and to this day, she remembers how, even while in a coma, she could vaguely hear conversations about how a priest was trying to get into her hospital room. I took in Anna's brother and his wife because they're good people. People who had always supported me, and who, to this day, remain some of the most grateful people I know. Since I don't use Facebook, I had no idea that Anna's brother or his wife had written a public post about what I did for them. They told me in person how much it meant, but I didn't realize they had shared it with the world. Which brings us back to today. Jake saw that post a year ago, and apparently he remembered it. He figured I'd just happily open my doors to him, his wife, and their 3 kids. I told him to fuck off. I was furious that he had the audacity to try and guilt-trip me into letting him and his family stay with me indefinitely. The same man who once told me that my child-free lifestyle was a bad influence on his precious family now suddenly found it convenient to pretend that never happened. No apology. No acknowledgement of the hurtful shit he said 3 years ago. Now, suddenly I was acceptable. Now I was useful. I told him straight up, I don't want kids in my house. If I did, I'd have had my own by now. I'm not about to turn my home, my sanctuary, into a fucking daycare for his 3 children. My house is for me and my 2 cats. That's it. He called me selfish, said I should think about the children, that they didn't have hot water. I told him that was his problem. He could pull out a credit card or ask his actual family to help pay for a hotel. He threw excuse after excuse at me. The medical debt, it's just for a few days, the desperation. I called bullshit. A broken water heater doesn't take multiple days to fix. That's a 1-day repair job, maybe 2. And I know the tenant laws in our state. If someone stays in your home for more than 7 days, they can claim tenant rights. I wasn't about to take that risk. Then he lost it, started yelling at me, threatening to trash me all over social media. He said he'd tell everyone how I refused to help a family in an emergency, how I was so heartless that I was making innocent children suffer. I told him to go fuck himself. We haven't been friends in years. He doesn't even know my address. All he knows is that I live somewhere in the same city and that I live alone. Let him rant online all he wants. I don't use Facebook. I couldn't care less what a bunch of time-wasting idiots on the internet think of me. I told him that social media isn't real life. If he actually went to my real friends and told them this sob story, they'd laugh in his face. I also told him I still had all his messages, proving what an absolute piece of shit he had been. And then I ended with this. You used to be a good person. We had some great times together. I still feel sorry for your mother's passing. And honestly, I feel bad for you. Because from the looks of it, you're miserable now. But you're a toxic presence in my life, and I can't have that around me. Surely, you understand. After all, you told me the same thing about my influence on you 3 years ago. That was my last message before I blocked him. I won't lie, this whole thing hurts. 10 years ago, he was a decent human being. His mother was a wonderful woman. And now, he's just this. Now, I'm waiting for the inevitable flying monkeys, the people who will try to guilt me into letting him stay. I can't wait to tell them to take him in themselves. I already talked this over with my 2 closest friends, and they were just as shocked at how shameless Jake had become. The fact that he was so insistent about staying in my home specifically set off major red flags for them. One of my friends mentioned that she had a broken water heater recently, and her plumber showed up the same day. The whole thing was fixed within 24 hours. The way Jake refused to even consider a hotel, the way he kept pushing for my place, of all places, yeah, something's off. I feel like I did the right thing, but it infuriates me that my past kindness was used against me. Years ago, I wondered if maybe he cut me out of his life because I was just too much to handle. Like, maybe I was too sad, and people just don't like being around sad people. But looking at everything now, with clear eyes, he was always like this. He just used to hide it better. And now, all those old memories, painful ones, are resurfacing. Anyway, thanks for listening. I just needed to get that off my chest. Update. Jake's water heater? Well, what do you know? The whole situation magically resolved itself in just over 24 hours. Imagine that. I have a feeling some people were working behind the scenes to shut this nonsense down before it could escalate. And for that, I'm very grateful. All right, let's get into it. I'm writing this while sipping on a hot cup of tea, and honestly, I suggest you do the same, because this is going to be a long one. But hey, who would have thought? Turns out you were all right. The whole broken water heater excuse. The one that supposedly forced a family of 5 to seek alternative housing? Yeah, it sounded fishy. And for good reason. Jake doesn't even have a water heater. The whole thing was a lie. Pause for your inevitable, I knew it. So, what was really going on? Jake sold his house 6 months ago. Ever since then, he and his wife, Shelly, have been trying to buy a bigger place. As I'm writing this, they're already in a hotel with their kids, enjoying as much hot water as they want. I can see you all nodding and saying, yep, called it. I know you've been waiting for this update, because the water heater excuse was obviously bullshit. Alright, here's what actually happened. Buckle up. My sister lives in a different time zone, and she had a few free hours to help me dig deeper into Jake's situation. Her husband used to do private investigation work while in grad school, and she herself has an almost supernatural ability to dig up hidden details about people. She's like a stalker, but in a good way. Plus, she's very social media savvy. I gave her Jake's full name, the address I remembered, his wife's and kids' names, and whatever scraps of information I had. She got to work. Turns out, Jake's house was listed for sale about 6 months ago and sold very quickly, for a lot more than what he originally paid for it. The housing market is wild right now, so it was a great deal for him. I was like, that's interesting. Then she checked all the real estate listings in the area and surrounding neighborhoods. No evidence that Jake had purchased a new home, which meant his house had been sold for a huge sum of money. And then, nothing. That's when I messaged my 2 friends, the ones I had already talked to about this situation. I told them what my sister found. Jake sold his house. The water heater excuse? Total bullshit, because he didn't even have a water heater anymore. Their response? What the actual fuck? One of them, Allison, decided to get in touch with my sister directly. They went deep, like rabbit hole level deep. Meanwhile, I also got a message from Kate's brother and his wife, the ones who had stayed with me when Kate was in the hospital. Turns out, this whole mess partially started because of them. See, Kate's sister-in-law, Laura, had posted on Facebook last year thanking me for helping them. She included a couple of pictures. One of my cat looking like he was laying down the law in my house, and another of one of my big monstera plants because she loves houseplants. The problem? Those photos showed just enough of my house to give an impression. A neat place, a big kitchen, a nice pantry. That detail is going to be important later. I told Laura what was going on, and she was horrified. She felt guilty, like she might have accidentally given Jake the idea to try and worm his way into my home. She immediately deleted the post, removed any mention of me, and sent me a screenshot as proof. Then she asked what else she could do to help. I told her that my sister was digging deeper and might need assistance. I put Laura in touch with my sister, and at some point, Laura also reached out to Allison. Then, around midday, Allison asked me for screenshots of my messages with Jake. Specifically, the part where he was claiming his emergency was about a water heater problem. I sent them over. And then, radio silence. All afternoon, I thought, something's happening. And sure enough, by evening, I got updates from my sister, Allison, and Laura. Here's the deal. Jake and his wife, Shelly, really did sell their house 6 months ago. They wanted more space and more bedrooms for their 3 kids. And in the insane housing market right now, their sale netted them a massive profit, 6 figures. They were so excited to upgrade that they sold first, assuming they'd quickly find their dream home. Jake and Shelly decided to cash out while the market was hot and list their house without a contingency. That means they sold it without first securing a new home. Jake was convinced that, after making such a big sale, they'd find a new place easily. Their house sold fast. There was even a bidding war. Jake bragged about it. Then they started house hunting and kept losing. Every offer they put in got outbid. Again and again. The moment finally came when the new owners were set to move into Jake and Shelly's former house. That meant they had to get out. At first, they didn't think it would be a big deal. A friend took them in, but with a clear condition that it was temporary and that they needed to actively search for a new home. And they did search, but they kept losing every bid. The issue? Jake and Shelly refused to lower their expectations or adjust their budget. They weren't willing to buy a house the same size as their old one, because the whole point of selling was to upgrade to a bigger place. But the market was brutal. Every single house they wanted got snatched up by higher bidders. Jake refused to increase their budget. On top of that, their third child had been born prematurely and had spent time in the NICU. They really did have medical debt. But Jake didn't want to spend more money or take out more loans. So, eventually Jake, Shelly, and their 3 kids moved in with another friend. They kept house hunting and kept losing. Then they moved in with someone else, and then someone else. By the time they reached their 3rd temporary home, people started giving them advice. Maybe they should wait out the housing bubble until the market wasn't so insane. Maybe they should just rent for a while. Jake flat out refused. He was adamant that renting was a waste of money. His logic? If I'm going to be paying for housing every month, it should be a mortgage, not rent. Shelly was even more furious at the idea. She refused to live in an apartment, especially one smaller than their old house. Meanwhile, their host started getting annoyed. Jake and Shelly weren't contributing to household expenses, especially groceries. And then, they ran out of free housing. Every single place they stayed asked them to leave. Why? Conveniently, every host suddenly had relatives coming for the holidays. Nobody wanted to deal with these freeloaders anymore. At this point, their only remaining options were Jake's brother, who lived 2 hours away, Shelly's parents, who lived 6 hours away. Neither option was convenient for Jake and Shelly's jobs or for their kids' schools. So what did they do? They got a hotel, and they hated it. Apparently, their kids were loud as hell, and the hotel staff kept telling them to quiet down. Jake and Shelly were miserable. They couldn't believe they had to live like this. They kept complaining about how unfair it was that they couldn't buy a house, even though they had the money. Just to be clear, they had more than enough money to afford a rental. They even had enough to comfortably stay in a hotel. Jake actually liked the hotel because there were no rental contracts and they could leave anytime they wanted. Produce Uzukiping. But Shelly? She went full victim mode. She complained about how her kids were so miserable because they didn't have a backyard to play in. According to her, living in a hotel is robbing them of their childhood. Meanwhile, Allison was still digging through Shelly's social media, and she found something interesting. Apparently, back at the start of the pandemic, Shelly and her group of mom friends had talked shit about me. Here's what happened. When COVID first hit, people went into full panic buying mode. Shelves were being wiped clean. Toilet paper? Gone. Canned goods? Gone. Frozen food? Flying off the shelves. One day, a former grad school acquaintance reached out to me. I thought she was just checking in, being nice. No, she was trying to get me to give her food. See, I've always had a separate freezer and a well-stocked pantry. It's a habit I picked up from my grandmother, who survived World War II. My mom did the same thing, and now I do too. This woman, who I barely spoke to anymore, knew I had extra food. She straight up told me that I needed to give her some of my groceries because I don't have kids to feed. Oh, and her child? A picky eater. She said she was sure I had plenty of frozen chicken and that I should share. The entitlement. I told her that if she was truly desperate, she could go to a food bank. I wasn't about to hand over my groceries just because her kid refused to eat anything but homemade chicken nuggets. This wasn't a food shortage. This was panic buying. I told her that if she went to the store early on a weekday morning when they restocked, she'd find plenty of food. Her response? She called me selfish. Apparently, she also posted about it on Facebook, trashing me behind my back to a group of our mutual acquaintances from grad school. And guess who joined in? Shelly, Jake's wife, the same woman who was now desperate to get into my house. Shelly also decided I was selfish for not helping a mother in need. According to her, it was weird for me to have so much food as a single person. She even suggested that I clearly had some kind of problem. And if you're thinking that the whole bad influence thing originally came from Shelly and not Jake, yeah, I think you're right. When Laura made that Facebook post praising my kindness and talking about how I had taken them in for a few days, Shelly commented on it. She went on and on about how wonderful I was, how amazing my house looked, so generous, so kind. This web of friendships is complicated, but at the core, most of us have known each other since grad school. Back then, things were tough. We all blew off steam by going on trips together, before most people got married or had kids. I always invited my close college friends to those trips, whether it was renting lake cabins or ski chalets. And now, Shelly was back to complaining. Her latest rant? that her kids were so miserable because they had no backyard to play in, that life in a hotel was stealing their childhood. And then, 2 days ago, Shelly posted something weird. She talked about how they had found a place, how it was so lovely, how her kids would finally be able to get out of the hotel, and how the kitchen was amazing, perfect for cooking meals for her children. And then yesterday, Jake messaged me out of the blue, after 3 years of silence, begging me to let his family stay at my house for a few days while their broken water heater got fixed. You already know how that turned out. And now, my friends noticed that Jake and Shelly had started leaving passive-aggressive comments on social media. This morning, they were complaining about how modern society is awful because friends refuse to help families in need. Shelly was whining about how their cute house option fell through, and her friends? Flooding her with sympathy. Her kids were so disappointed, so unfair, so cruel. And that's when Allison asked for the receipts. She wanted screenshots of Jake's water heater emergency messages. I sent them. And then, Allison and Laura went nuclear. They exposed Jake and Shelly. Publicly, they posted everything. They made it clear that Jake and Shelly had no new home, that they lied about their water heater, that they tried to manipulate me into letting them move in, that I never agreed to take them in. Laura called them entitled assholes for trying to take advantage of me. And Allison? She was furious. She still remembered how Jake had cut me off 3 years ago, how he had said I was a bad influence because I didn't have kids. Now he was crawling back, expecting me to help. Allison, by the way, also doesn't have kids. So this whole thing pissed her off even more. And then, it snowballed. People started roasting Jake for how cheap and entitled he was. People who had hosted his family over the last few months started sharing their own stories. One guy described how filthy Jake's family was, how their kids were disasters who left the house a mess, terrorized their dogs, and turned their home into a nightmare. The moment they left, it was like a celebration. People were outraged that Jake had tried to do the same thing to me, and then paint me as the villain when I said no. Even people I hadn't talked to in years came to my defense. They started sharing memories, how I had helped them in grad school, how I had gone out of my way to support others. One person even said, "She's helped more people find jobs than Jake ever did." Which is true. I still mentor grad students and help them network in academia. And then, even Jake's own brother stepped in and dragged him. He said he was disgusted by Jake's behavior, and he reminded everyone how much I had helped their family when Jake's mom died. He even said, "Mom would be rolling in her grave if she knew how you were treating people." And just like that, Jake's plan blew up in his face. My sister called me on Zoom and screen shared the whole thing. And you know what? I have been waiting for the flying monkeys, waiting for someone to come at me, demanding I feel guilty and do the right thing. They never came. Not a single one. Jake swore he was going to blow up Facebook with his sob story. Instead, he got blown the fuck up, absolutely destroyed. And the best part? I had proof. His own messages, full of lies about the water heater. Did he really think that, just because I'm not on social media, I'd never find out? That I wouldn't be able to defend myself? Meanwhile, he's in a hotel, enjoying all the hot water he wants. And me? I feel like I dodged a nuclear bomb. When I got home from work, I poured myself a drink and just sat with it, thinking about everything. One last thing, remember how he freaked out when I mentioned the 7-day rule for tenant rights in our state? Yeah, that wasn't random. Jake knew exactly what he was doing, and I wasn't about to let it happen. I knew something was off, and so did you. I think Jake was just a greedy bastard who didn't want to spend another cent on a hotel. He still didn't want to look for an apartment. He had burned through every free housing option in the city. I was his last shot. His wife knew I was open to guests. She knew my house was nice, and she knew I had plenty of food that her kids could eat. They already had a reputation for cleaning out people's kitchens when they stayed over. And if they had stayed with me for a week, they would have become tenants. I would have had to legally evict them. And with the way courts are backed up right now, that could have taken months. It's way easier to pull this kind of scam on a single person, someone with no other family in the house. Way easier to try to edge them out of their own home. Not so easy to pull this on his actual friends, who already have kids and don't have extra space. Jake was only looking for free housing. He wanted to put every single penny into his dream house. A 4-bedroom plus home, bought with the profit from his last sale. I can't prove that's 100% the case. But damn, it makes sense. So I unblocked him and sent him one last message. Hey Jake, so I found out you lied about the water heater. You don't even have one. You're staying in a hotel and sitting on a pile of cash from selling your old house. It's disgusting that you would lie to me and try to weasel your way into my home just to live off of me for free. Especially after you destroyed our friendship by telling me I was a bad influence on your family. I didn't say this back then, but I'll say it now. Your mother would be ashamed of you. I see it now. This was projection, because the real bad influence? It's you, not just in my life, but in everyone else's. If you truly believed I was such a negative force, you would have never tried to move your family into my house. But hey, if you still think I'm a bad influence, then don't worry. I'll make sure to never help you. I'll make sure to never do you a favor. I'll keep my bad influence as far away from your family as possible. Oh, and Shelly? What a gem. The last thing I'll ever do for you, because I'm not a monster, is give you some advice. Step up. Be a husband and a father. Pay for stable housing for your family. Quit this mooching act. Here's a link to available rentals in the area. I'm sure you'll find something. Oh, and looking forward to seeing you at the next academic networking event. It'll be a great chance to chat in person. Take care. That was it. I said what I needed to say. You were right. This wasn't just random. This was planned. And honestly, it hurts to know someone would scheme like this against me. The thought that I could have let them into my home? That would have been a nightmare.